So whenever there's bare soil, weeds are going to show up. And the ones that will tend to dominate the place are the ones who are more capable of, with the resources available, to produce physical matter out of sunlight.
Forget about sustainability. You want to enrich ecosystems.
Every being is equipped to live a positive, energetic balance.
Keep it pruned.
We are cultivating abundance.
Not a problem to cut down trees. The problem is not planting them.
What is up, YouTube? Welcome to the Agroforestry Academy channel. Today, I want to talk to you about weeds. Weeds is a very important topic that needs to be properly addressed because conventionally weeds are thought of as something ultimately bad in agriculture. So farmers and gardeners are constantly fighting weeds. And in agroforestry, as a general rule, we try not to fight anything. We need to make a mindset shift where we are cooperating with nature instead of combating it. So with that in mind, let's first consider the purpose of weeds. Why are there weeds? Why do they show up? And what is a weed to start with? So a weed theoretically would be any plant that spontaneously shows up in your field without you planting it. And they have a damaging effect on your crop. So they will reduce productivity. So that's basically the concept of weed. But why are there weeds showing up in your field? I'm going to take a stroll here in my field as we talk. And I'm going to gather some weeds because I want to talk about them as we go. So nature is always trying to optimize resources and energy. So bare soil is something that's not at all useful for nature because it's bare soil will lose its capacity to hold water. Bare soil will reach extremes of temperature. Bare soil will grow poorer as time goes by. So it's a bad deal to have bare soil. So nature's got many strategies to avoid bare soil. One of them is weeds. So whenever there's bare soil, weeds are going to show up. And the ones that will tend to dominate the place are the ones who are more capable of, with the resources available, to produce physical matter out of sunlight. So these are the ones that are going to show up and they will spontaneously reproduce and take over the place. That's why you can very often tell the fertility state of a soil by the kinds of weeds that show up there, because they are the ones that are most adapted to that sort of soil. These are the ones that are going to, proliferate more. So if it's a weed that demands rich soils, and if this weed is proliferating, then your soil is rich. If it's a weed typical of acidic soils that's proliferating, then your soil is acidic. And the interesting thing is, every plant will have a positive effect on the ecosystem. So it will improve the ecosystem. So let's take the example of acidic soils. Acidic soil plants, they will actually over time increase the pH of the soil. So they will mitigate the problem of acidity. And that's an important concept to understand. Weeds are there to make the environment better. Every plant is there to make the environment better. So that's one thing to keep in mind. They are a good thing if we extract them from an agricultural context. But when you put them in an agricultural context, they very often pose a problem to farmers because they will, if not managed properly, decrease yields. With that in mind, we still have to remember that they show up for a purpose, and we have to take the responsibility into ourselves to fulfill that purpose that we do not want to be fulfilled by certain weeds. And the way we do that is by properly covering our soil and planting our fields in a dense enough manner that weeds will not show up because there is no space for them. There is no need for them. So they won't show up. But it's hard to have such a perfect field that no weeds will show up. So we have to deal with them nonetheless. And today I want to talk to you about how to deal with them. I divide weeds in 3 types: the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let's start with the ugly types. Obviously, we want to keep the good ones. We definitely want to get rid of the ugly ones and the bad ones. So this is an example of an ugly weed. Take a close look. Can you see those nasty pricks? If you get stung by these pricks, you will be hurting for maybe a week, several days at least. So this is an ugly weed because it's going to make any operation in my system harder because I might get hurt. So any weed that has the potential to get you to hurt you, that's an ugly weed because it's just going to make it so much harder to do the operations in your field that you want to get rid of them. Another example of an ugly weed are several vines. There are some very nasty vines that will just take over everything, and they're hard to manage because it's hard to find out where they're sprouting from, and they'll just start tying everything up, and by tying everything up, it's just going to make your life hell. It's going to make your life hell because it's going to be hard to untie things, and you need to keep on looking for where the vine's coming from and make sure you don't break your plants. So this is also an ugly type of weed. So mostly these are the ugly types of weeds that I like to say. So nasty vines. There are vines that are not so ugly, that are easy to manage, but some of them are just really hard. And plants that have the potential to hurt you or to cause irritation on your skin, that kind of stuff. So these ones you want to eliminate for sure. Let me show you an example. I'm going to throw this away. This is a plant that's got pricks, but they're not nearly as nasty as the one that I just showed you. They look really nasty, but they're not. Check it out. Right, at first you'd look at this plant and say, holy shit, this is ugly. But honestly, it's not so ugly. The pricks, they're not so hard. They're kind of soft. They won't hurt you so badly. They can hurt you, but it's not so bad. This is actually a tree that grows fast. And it's from the nightshade family, right? The tomato, eggplant, and pepper family. And it's got a soft stem, so it's easy to prune. Like I said, the pricks are not so hard. You can see that I could actually hold the plant. And it's going to improve my soil. This is a great plant for enriching poor soils. So I'm very happy to work with it. This is one of the vines I was talking to you about, right? This is a very thin vine. This one is small, but this, you can see that it's got like 5-6 different vines coming out of it, and it would just go into my system and start tying everything out. It is a legume, so it supposedly fixes nitrogen, but it's not worth the effort. Right, so these are the ugly ones. You want to get rid of them as soon as possible. Now let's go to the bad ones. Now the bad ones, they won't hurt you, but they will decrease your crop's yields by immobilizing nutrients and not giving them back. A very common one is Commelina, or the Wandering Jew. This is it. This is what I consider a bad vine in most systems, a bad weed in most systems. What happens with this plant is it's very efficient in the way that it grows really fast, so it produces lots of organic matter. It easily turns nutrients in the soil and sunlight into body matter, and it will just start spreading around, and it will root. I should find a living one, but I've done a pretty good job in eliminating them, so it's hard to find one that's alive. But let me see if there you go. It will take root easily from any one of these nodes, and any small part of it that's left on the field will take root and regrow. So it's got very shallow roots. It will take root in the organic matter as soon as it starts decomposing. It will provide a nice carpet on the field, a nice green carpet. But the fact is, since it's a crawling plant, and once you take it out, if you take it out from the soil and you leave it there, it's not going to die and decompose. It will take root again, and it will continue to immobilize nutrients on the soil. That's something you don't want, because since it's a shallow rooted plant, it will immobilize nutrients from the surface, which is the richest part of the soil. So it's unmanageable, and that's a bad weed, a weed that you can't manage, because it's crawling, so you can't prune it. It's really hard to prune it because it's too small to prune it with a machete, and it will take over the place. It will immobilize nutrients without turning them back to the soil. I have no problems with weeds that will turn nutrients back to the soil, but if they just immobilize them and they will never return it to the soil, then it's bad for my crops. So I don't want this kind of weed. Weeds need to turn the nutrients back to soil, either naturally. So for example, this plant in a semi-arid region, it's not so bad because it will die at some point during the dry season, and it will turn nutrients back to the soil. But my system is irrigated, so it's never going to die. It's just going to continue going on forever, and that's bad for me. Now let's go to the good weeds. I have one right here, the pigeon pea. This is a weed that I chose to plant. If I allow it to be here and to take the seed, it will become a weed because it's going to start sprouting naturally. But this is a good weed because it's got a deep tap root. It's not going to immobilize nutrients from the surface. It will improve my soil. It's easy to prune. So, just with a quick blow from the machete, that's it. It's returning nutrients to the soil. That's what I want from a weed. It will take nutrients from the soil, it will bind them in organic matter, and it will return it to the soil. That's a good weed. Do you want another example? The pigeon pea. The jack beans. Pigeon pea is the one I just showed. The jack beans, look, it's been pruned 2 to 3 times. It's easy to prune, with a machete or with a pruning scissors. You can just easily and quickly prune a bunch of them. That's another good weed. It will fix nitrogen. Do you want to see another good weed? The castor beans. And all these that I'm showing you, they were planted, but they will become weeds if I allow them to flower and to spread seeds. They will easily start becoming, and they are problems in some areas because they've got the potential to turn into weeds. And so I chose to plant these weeds because I know that the niches in the soil need to be taken by some plant. And I chose the ones that are easier to manage and the ones that will turn over the most amount of organic matter. That's what you need to look for. Those weeds that will have a positive impact on your soil and will be manageable. This is the most important characteristic of your weeds and of your service plants in general. You need them to be manageable, easily manageable. There's so many operations in agroforestry systems that you can't really spend time, too much time with them. You need to make them as efficient as possible. You need to be able to do them as quickly as possible. So anything you can do to reduce labor is a good thing. It's a good thing. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I think that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. Just to wrap it up, let's remember the 3 kinds of weeds. The ugly weed. That's the weed that will hurt you when you interact with it. So nasty pricks, weeds that will cause allergies and irritation on your skin. Nasty vines, which will just wrap everything up and make a mess. Check it out. Remember that prick I showed you? This is the pile of what was collected around this area, and I'm just gonna burn it actually because it's just so hard to manage. I don't even want to use it as organic matter because it will, even as organic matter, it will hurt me until it decomposes. So these are the ugly ones. The bad ones are the ones that will immobilize nutrients and not return them easily. So it's going to be really hard for them to return the immobilized nutrients into the soil. That means that they're hard to prune. They're going to keep on growing forever. They won't return it naturally, and they are hard to be forced to return the nutrients, because pruning is all about that. It's forcing the plant to return nutrients to the soil. And the good ones are the ones that grow well. They will prevent other weeds from growing. They will naturally return nutrients to the soil, or they are easy to be pruned in a cheap way, and they won't compete for space. And pay attention that I'm talking about competing for space, not nutrients. They will not compete because they will be turning over nutrients. So they will not compete for space with your main crops. This is something you do not want as well. So if your main crop, for example, my main crop is a pineapple, it's a low strata plant. I don't want to have low strata plants on the field. Low strata plant is my pineapple. They need to be either above the pineapple or below the pineapple. This is an important concept. Or they could be in different time frames. So for example, I could have jack beans. Jack beans is a low to medium strata plant, but from a different life cycle than the pineapple. Jack beans will be gone in 5 months. The pineapple is an 18 months plant, so I can have them both, no problem. What do you do with the ugly weeds? Just take them out and burn them. You don't have to burn them, but just take them out of the field. Manage them in a way. You need to eliminate them, and using them as organic matter might be a problem because even dead they might hurt you. You need to eliminate them. What do you do with bad weeds? Same thing. You eliminate them. What do you do with good weeds? You prune them. You manage them. Most grasses are also very good weeds if you have the amount of labor necessary, the amount of labor available to manage them, because they're so good, they're so prolific that in some situations you're going to need to be pruning them every 15 or 20 days. So this is something to consider. You never want to allow your weeds, your good weeds, to go past flowering stage, because then they start having a negative impact on your system, because when they're going into fruiting, into setting fruit, flowers and fruits, they're going to start immobilizing lots of resources, because seeds and fruits, they're very nutrient dense organs. So you want to be pruning them before that. You don't want to have flowering weeds on your field. So when they're flowering, you need to be pruning them. Otherwise, they will have a negative impact on your main crops. So that's one thing important to keep in mind. But you want to have them around. I like to say, there's a saying, this is, for me, it's an agroforestry law. It goes like this. I actually took this from Kung Fu. I don't know if you're familiar with the series, Kung Fu. It's from the 60s or the 70s with David Carradine. He's like this Kung Fu guy. He trained in a Shaolin temple, and he had a master. And the master once would tell him something like, how is it? It's like something like avoid rather than check, check rather than hurt, hurt rather than maim, maim rather than kill, something like that. And I translated that into agroforestry systems. So this saying, harvest rather than cut, cut rather than weed, weed rather than lose control. The idea is, if you can have harvestable weeds, all the better. So if you can colonize all the spaces with things you're going to harvest, you're not going to have to weed, because you're going to be harvesting the weeds. If that's not possible, this is the ideal situation. But if you don't manage to do that, because that takes very diligent and perfect work, you should have weeds that you can cut, and you don't have to actually weed them, which means taking them out. So all of these good weeds that I mentioned to you, they're cuttable. So, jack beans, pigeon pea, castor beans, most grasses, sorghum, many legume plants, other legumes besides the jack beans and the pigeon pea. So you can cut them, but weed rather than lose control of your field, because then the nasty weeds, the bad and the ugly weeds, they're going to take over the field if you don't weed them. So you need to do that. So remember that. Harvest rather than cut, cut rather than weed, weed rather than lose control over your field. And with that saying, I'm going to leave it for today. If you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, there's a link somewhere to subscribe. That's the best way you can do to help us out. And I'll see you on the next video. Cheers.